The anime begins with the protagonist who is forced to get a club because the school demands it. So while walking around the school, he comes across the magic club, and when he snoops around the classroom, he comes across a girl performing a trick in the magic club. As soon as she sees her guest, the girl starts to vomit because the girl has stage fright. Now that there is an interested party in the club, the girl called Tejina decides to try to persuade him to join them with magic tricks, but everything goes wrong as the dove escapes from her and cut a bill in half. In the end, she ends up tied with a rope in the strangest way possible, but the protagonist, for his part, was amazed with that last trick. The next day, our protagonist is walking when he comes across the magic girl giving a performance in front of several people, and when she sees him, she calls him her assistant, so she asks him to come over to help her with her act. But the assistant's job is to buy time with those present while she prepares her next trick. The protagonist knows how to do some simple tricks, and all of them turn out well, earning him a few applauses, while the girl looked at him with some envy. Now it's time for the main trick, escaping from the box. The girl gets into the box, and after a few minutes, everyone thinks that she has already left with Jesus Christ because she stopped moving. In the panic of the moment, the assistant decided to take the box to check if the magic was right, and then he finds that the girl had been left in a rather complicated position trying to get out of the box. On another occasion, the girl invites our protagonist to eat some rolls at her club, where he would discover that inside one of the rolls was the key to her house. So get even for stealing the key, the protagonist locks the girl inside the box of tricks, a box that she ends up breaking from the inside with sheer force. After this, it's time to do a trick with milk, but she accidentally throws it on him, which luckily saves the assistant from drowning. The next day, it's time to meet the new pigeon of the magic club, since we remember that the first one escaped at the beginning. So to prevent the bird from escaping again, the girl learned that she must sleep with the little bird, feed it, and bathe it. Since she must spend a lot of time with the animal so that it becomes fond of it and does not escape anymore. At the end of the day, it turns out that the animal did not care and ended up escaping, so now there is a reward for whoever manages to get it. Then we see a new day where the protagonist is an antisocial who has not been able to make friends and has to eat lunch alone. But luckily for him, there is another loner in the cafeteria. That's right, the dear Tejina. She explains to him how to do the trick of bending the spoon, which can be done with anyone, just by applying a little force at the right angle. This is how the protagonist achieves it the first time. But with the force she puts into it, she ends up taking the spoon flying and therefore makes a little hot sauce fall on the assistant's food, who did not notice this because he went to bring him another one. When he returns, Tejina hypnotizes him, so to speak, because obviously it is a lie so that he believes that his food will taste spicy. But he understands that he is not hypnotized by what he gives of his food to Tejina. She, wanting to prove that her trick is not false, began to eat the spicy food, but with an impressive willpower because she was sweating like a pig. Back in the classroom, it's time to present the trick of the coin that goes through the glass. But in reality, the trick consists of throwing the coin towards the hand above so that it bounces, giving the illusion that it went through the glass. The problem with this trick is that Tejina is very clumsy and always ends up sending the coin far away, and whenever she looks for it, she ends up showing more than she should. The protagonist, being a gentleman, tells her that she shouldn't go around doing those things, but she understands that he was referring to the trick, while he talks about her showing more than she should. Tejina explains to him that if she does it, it's to entertain him, referring to failing the magic trick, while the protagonist thinks that she's referring to fan service, and while things happen that I can't show here, Tejina throws the coin in his face to calm his anger. Then a new day arrives in the classroom where Tejina presents her new acquisition, a stuffed animal. The joke is to make the animal look real, moving as if it were a puppet, but this does not last long, as well as her love, because after a trick with the cards, he ends up being stepped on. Later in a park, Tejina tries to entertain some children who are quite demanding, since they are the ones who like social networks the most. The assistant manages to entertain them a little because he ended up involved again. But then our magical girl would resume the show by changing clothes under her cape. Only that at the time of changing, she does not have her change of clothes, so she was left as God brought her into the world and had to leave the park. Then the day to hand in the club form arrives, and as expected, the protagonist will not enter the magic club, but Tejina's cravings will make him stay. She does not plan to let go of her only friend and possible member, so she ties him to a chair and steals the form while doing a magic trick, while explaining to him that both are like nail and dirt, they are inseparable. The protagonist, since he does not have much left to do, gets the idea that if he accepts, he could become the idiot in the magic club to see Tejina doing her magic tricks, and she could thus found her magic club, since without enough members and an assigned teacher, technically, is not a club. When they go into the teacher's room, they come across a very nice teacher who teaches the protagonist, but who for some reason intimidates Tejina. It turns out that this teacher is her older sister, and the reason why Tejina doesn't approach her is because her sister is one of those who express her love by touching her bumpers. Then after a magic trick, in the teacher's room they give her the form, and of course, the sister offers to be assigned teacher of the club, so double prize. And now with this we go to a month since this event, and it is time for a surprise exam for the members of the club to see how much they have learned about magic. But as soon as our protagonist begins to show her magic tricks, Tejina begins to criticize absolutely everything. The exam being only a way to lower the self-esteem of its only member because she wanted to show off everything she knew about magic. Thus, the assistant, very angry at the mockery, tells Tejina to prove the opposite. This is how we now have Tejina in front of us teaching us her magical knowledge. Although her skirt was torn, no one could pay attention to her tricks seeing such a spectacle. The assistant tries to tell her with hints what is happening. She is not even aware of it, and ends up realizing later in the bathroom when he wanted to tell her. After this, it is time to help Tejina with her stage fright with some advice taken from the internet, advice that ends up going wrong because she ends up throwing all the water due to a piece of advice that suggested she drink a lot. The second consists of distracting herself while the assistant tickled her, but he does not want to, so she again belittles the protagonist for not being able to help her distract herself properly, because she did not even feel that they were touching her. So he decided to show what he was capable of by tickling her until she was immobilized on the floor. On another occasion, Tejina would try to do some classic Japanese magic tricks, but it goes so wrong that she sets some papers on fire inside the classroom, which causes the sprinklers to turn on. After this, they end up outside because a teacher scolded them for playing pranks like little kids. It is then that Tejina has the brilliant idea of stealing the pigeons from the park in order to train them and make them her magic trick partners. Obviously, it goes wrong because she ends up pecked. And when this is not enough for her, she tries a few moments later to steal the eggs from their nest in order to create the popcorn for newborns. It all ends with her being attacked in a tree by the pigeons. Our protagonist abandons her, and she ends up with pigeon droppings on her face. As we know, it's been a month since the club started, and our protagonist seems to be no longer comfortable with Tejina's antics, so she's trying to entertain him with a few magic tricks. But as always, it goes wrong. As soon as the protagonist tries to leave the room, she tries to force him to stay with her, because they must be together as members of the magic club. In the middle of the struggle, the sister appears, who is hiding inside a box. The reason the teacher is there is that she has the bad news that the magic club can't exist because there aren't enough members for it. It's then that the protagonist begins to look for another club to join. But Tejina isn't willing to let her only member go, so in each club he attends, she intervenes in some way, curiously showing that she has a lot of quite outstanding attitudes. They even invite her to join the athletics club because of how fast she is. However, she only wants to get members for the magic club. Finally, the day comes when the magic club must dissolve due to lack of members, and as a last trick, Tejina will do the box trick with some swords. Although when doing the trick, she ends up with her clothes torn. After this, we see that Tejina does all the tricks she tried to do in the first chapter, managing to make them all turn out well. But they turned out well because she was alone in the room since her assistant would no longer be with her, although he would come in through the door to see her. Since it turns out that the magic club does not exist, she joined the chemistry club and asked the president of the chemistry club to allow Tejina to continue in the magic club, being in the club only in name, but is not necessary for her to really attend. Although they put the condition that she should not go around doing strange things, the girl already thinks that within the magic club they do everything except magic, since she hears strange things inside the club. Then it's another day and our protagonist tells Tejina that some girls from his class will come to the magic club because they found out about its existence, and he says this to try to convince Tejina not to do anything strange. But not even a few seconds passed when Tejina was already preparing to entertain the girls. When they just arrive, and upon entering, it seems like they enter a house of horrors and end up scared and fleeing the place. Now to liven up the atmosphere, our dear magician will do the clothes change trick, the one she couldn't do in the park a few days ago. For this occasion, she will be helped by her sister, who pulls some threads that are in Tejina's clothes so that she changes clothes in an instant. When pulling the first thread, we see that she has a rather revealing red dress and then a swimsuit, although not the typical beach swimsuit, but a full-body one to avoid giving us distractions during this trick. The last suit is the skin-colored one with nothing on it, which gives the illusion of being in nothing. Although technically nothing is visible, the protagonist is grateful to the one above for such a tremendous magic trick. While our protagonist was in the chemistry club, he feels a tense atmosphere with Madara, the president of the chemistry club. She doesn't talk at all, so to break the ice, he comments that magic and chemistry are the same, which the girl does by jumping to say that magicians only make people believe in things that aren't real. She proceeds to prove her point with some physics experiments that are quite striking. The protagonist is fascinated, saying that his senpai would be delighted with the tricks he has shown her, to which she explains that she respects Tejina a lot because although she's quite clumsy, she's very dedicated to what she's passionate about just like her, being that the reason why she does not complain about the noises that are heard sometimes. After these interactions, as expected, we had to have some scenes of Madara out of place since it seems that our protagonist is blessed since things like this always happen. Back at the magic club, Tejina prepared a joke on this occasion in which she would hide in the box so that when the protagonist entered she would scare him. Even though the plan was good, it ends up going wrong when he enters and sits in the box unable to get out. The protagonist begins to give his opinion about Tejina, in short that she is very stubborn, clumsy, among other things that make him feel bad. But then he tells her how good she is, making her excited. But in reality, he is saying it to the stuffed animal. Tejina thinks he is referring to her, so she leaves the box saying that she cannot accept those feelings, although the protagonist was not present. That is why the next day she invites him to her house to talk about what she heard at the club. And although the protagonist was between nervous and excited about what could happen in a girl's room, his excitement quickly passed when he saw the tremendous messy room, but at least he could see the magical girl's underwear. It is then that, out of shame, she confesses that she heard everything at the club, saying that she couldn't accept her feelings, but the protagonist remembers what she had said, clarifying that she was referring to the stuffed animal and not her, which leaves her embarrassed. After the weekend, a girl named Saki would arrive at the magic club exclaiming that she would take over the club. The girl is a fan of street shows, and not to mention that she really likes things related to clowns, so she wants to take over the club because magic and shows are quite similar. And she wants her handsome, elegant, and intelligent little brother to also become part of the club. But just when she finishes saying this, our protagonist begins to imagine if he saw any boy with similar characteristics who just transferred because, yes, both little brothers have just arrived at the school. But he is disappointed when the boy enters the classroom because he looks like Majin Buu. At school, Masashi apologizes for his sister's attitude, explaining that he does not want to take over the club or anything like that since they only want to join as one more member. Zaki continues to insist on turning the club into a street performance club and proposes holding a competition to see who does the best tricks in order to decide the theme of the club. The invader starts with a trick of inflating a balloon and getting inside it so that it deflates, completely enveloping her. Only there is a small problem. Her skirt fell while she was doing this, but she can't give up on her demonstration. So she bursts the balloon, revealing all her merchandise. After Zaki's great trick, it's Tejina's turn, and as expected, nothing goes well for her. So there is no clear winner. It is then that the teacher arrives to say that if they want to decide the theme, it would be best if they decided it by the weight of her melons. This is how our magical girl ends up winning. Later, it's time to practice hypnosis on our protagonist, and as expected, he is unable to do it, so they decide to reverse the roles. So the assistant ends up discovering that Tejina is very easy to hypnotize, so much so that she manages to transfer her senses of touch to a bottle and even manages to make her think that she is in hot springs so that she undresses as a form of revenge. Although he decides to stop her by making her believe that he is a cat, the protagonist then comes up with the best idea to get rid of her stage fright. So he performs the procedure to hypnotize her, but even though the trick worked, Tejina still can't do magic in public. Now we are in the cooking class where Zaki tries to make some cookies for her little brother. But her cooking skills are deplorable, but she notices that Tejina is quite good in class and asks her to stay with her after school so she can teach her how to bake cookies, which she agrees to. So while they were cooking together, Zaki asks her why she is so stubborn with the magic club, to which she would answer that before the magic club was a club, but the girls from higher grades were graduating, which ended up leaving her as the only member. This being the year in which they would finally close the club due to lack of members. So after the conversation, the girls finished preparing the cookies, which would be for the assistant and Masashi. Only they had to be careful not to exchange them because the protagonists had something strange. In the end, what should have happened and the cookies did end up exchanged, with Masashi being the one who would end up taking out little papers from his mouth, which would cause an argument between both girls. Later, the budget for the magic club arrives from the school, but it turns out that they didn't give her enough. So because of this, the club decides to go out to the park to get some money doing magic tricks. This goes pretty well for everyone except for our magician, because she still can't handle her stage fright. At least later, a man would offer her a lot of money to go with him to do private magic tricks. The next day, Tejina wants to practice a trick underwater at school, which worries everyone because Tejina is now about to put her life at risk. Even though she says that she already practiced the trick and it's easy, but luckily it doesn't happen because those present stop her from trying. After a little scene in which Zaki tries to get his little brother to give Boka mouth resuscitation, we see that Tejina was down because they didn't let her do her trick. So the protagonist decides that he will let her try it on the condition that she tries it only with her hands tied with a small rope. But then the protagonist ends up getting into the pool to try to save her because it takes too long, and instead of thanking him for the gesture, she gets angry because she almost did the trick. Back in the club room, the assistant notices that Tejina is quite good at magic when they are not looking. So he suggests experimenting with the kind of audience in which she can already use her magic, and after several levels, her best turns out to be having someone in front of her, even with her eyes blindfolded. That is why, to practice, the assistant leaves her a cardboard figure of himself before leaving the club. When she is left alone with a piece of cardboard, the girl decides to do the trick of cutting the bill, managing to do it without problems, and right behind the cardboard figure comes the protagonist who never really left. Impressed that Tejina was able to do the trick, although the happiness does not last long because Tejina vomits from nerves when she sees him. The next day it was time to put Chinese magic into practice, and the first trick would consist of putting on a mask and changing it without the change being noticed. Everyone has a different notion of how the trick is done, so they start trying to test the various theories to be able to perform it. In the end, who knows if any theory was true or not because they all go wrong, with the last two ending up in juicy situations. On another occasion, it is time to learn to read minds, and the theory of this is that based on a book, all you have to do is look at a person's body language to know what they are thinking. But Tejina is terrible at trying to guess what her assistant is thinking, stating that for her he is nothing more than an open book. It's a pity that for Tejina, reality is different because she is the one who is very easy to read so much that the protagonist can easily say everything he is thinking. The next day, Tejina makes a word game with a leaf referring to the fact that some parts of plants are pronounced almost the same as pairs of the face. Nothing very relevant, but what is relevant is that now the Magic Club is already a club for having more than a couple of members. So for this reason, they should now be able to do activities outside of school. But for this, they must be requested by other places, thus making themselves known. And for this, there is the internet. Saki offers to be the one who manages the social networks to make the Magic Club attractive for those who want to quote them. But let's say that from afar, it seems to be the website of a Magic Club, since it seems more like an Ollie fan of Tejina. Luckily for the club, and daycare ends up hiring them to put on a show, something they achieve quite successfully thanks to Masashi and his sister. To our surprise, Tejina was putting on a pretty good show, so although things didn't go as expected, she could fool the children enough to impress them, something that made her quite happy, until the children attacked her trying to find the candy she had hidden during a trick. As the days go by, Tejina now wants to do a new trick with the members of her club, putting her secrets inside envelopes and opening and reading them, guessing who said secrets are from. The thing is that the envelopes are marked and she already knows who they will be from, although she forgets who the marks she put on the envelopes belong to, so she will have to guess anyway. The first secret to be read eludes someone from the club who has not gotten enough attention, and Tejina thinks that it is about our protagonist who she thinks she has not paid much attention to since the brothers arrived. But he responds saying that he obviously wrote it for Zaki, referring to his brother. But Tejina says that this can't be possible because the next secret says that he worries about his melons continuing to grow, which makes sense that he puts it on a girl, but in reality it was Masashi's secret. Now it's the protagonist's turn to do the trick to show how it's done, although it's not necessary to see the marks on the envelopes to know who it is. The first envelope has a love letter that is evidently from Zaki about his brother. So then the second letter is a complaint from Masashi because his brother wears his clothes. The last secret is from Tejina, and when she opens it, it turns out that she didn't write anything, which annoys everyone, causing them to leave. The next day, it's time for a makeup exam, which Zaki and Tejina attend. When they're left alone for a moment, the latter decides to play a little game with her partner. The game consists of counting numbers from 1 to 30 by only saying a maximum of 3 numbers, losing the one who has to say the number 30. This is a math game, and it is relatively easy to win as long as you always say certain numbers starting from 21, and even though they have it super easy to win, Tejina gets distracted and added to the fact that she is so bad with numbers that she says she has nothing to do against Saki. But the latter, upon realizing the number she wants, decides to let her win, but out of excitement. Tejina raises her arm, hitting the teacher who was behind her, so now both will be punished for the entire afternoon. Then summer comes, and it is very hot. That is why after a trick that no one enjoyed, everyone agrees to go to the beach to enjoy the season. However, when they agree to go, Tejina will not have a swimsuit, so they have to take her shopping, and there will be Masashi and our protagonist, who would be Tejina's advisors to start using the swimsuit he wanted. And that's why, when he's left alone with his Masashi, he teaches him negotiation tactics to apply with Tejina, so he can see her however he wants, demanding that she doesn't settle for a simple swimsuit. So he explains that it's best to start with the most swimsuit possible so that she'll accept anything. Only there's one problem: how do you suggest to a friend that she wears something without looking like a slob? Then they must apply this second technique, which consists of starting little by little and then raising the tone. So they pass the swimsuits to Tejina, and she puts on the most one without any problem, because by mistake, Masashi passed the suit to his sister. But anyway, Tejina manages to give us a view of her swimsuit. Then Tejina decides to play a little joke. The trick consists of talking to the assistant to go see her, but she changes her dressing room shoes to make him believe that she disappeared when she opens the curtain. But what they didn't count on was that his store manager would move her shoes back to where they were, making the protagonist, upon opening the curtain, almost see her as God brought her into the world. Now everyone is at the beach and Tejina shows off her swimsuit as well as a bulge down there. Since the bikini doesn't have pockets, she decided to store her magic things down there, and so she would start her day at the beach having fun doing various things. At one point, the boys decided to rest under the shadows while the girls played in the water until a wave comes to take off the top of the swimsuit. But luckily for them, Tejina had a jar with magic sand with her, which solidifies upon contact with water. This is how they managed to cover themselves by hardening the sand in the water. However, there is a problem, and it is that if they get out of the water, that mass turns back into sand, so they remain stuck in the water. Saki decides to use the trick of covering herself with a balloon, and this is how both finally manage to get out of the water. But unfortunately for them, they step on a twig and their suits disappear, revealing their bumpers. While our protagonist was walking along the beach, he bumps into Madara, who had also gone on vacation with his grandmother. The girl invites him to experience a science trick in which they both throw themselves on the ground on the beach to watch the sunset. And when the sun is no longer visible, they both stand up only to notice that they can see the sun again, which has to do with the curvature of the earth. After this, he invites the girl to the magic club to cut a watermelon. The first to participate is Masashi, who instead of ending up in front of the watermelon ends up in 2 watermelons. Then it is Madara's turn, who has a terrible sense of direction. Then it is Tejina's turn, who, to the misfortune of those present, ends up hitting everyone except the watermelon. At night, it is time to light fireworks, and here they decide to tie Tejina up because she is a danger to everyone. But when no one was watching, she manages to get out of her bonds to get a lighter and do the trick of burning a bill. But she was supposed to burn a fake bill, but she burned the real one. Despite losing so much money, she still wants to do another magic trick in which she must burn a paper to get a flower out of the flames. The only bad thing about this is that when she was distracted with her thoughts, the flower ended up burning too, and in the panic of the moment, she threw the flaming flower into the fireworks, causing them all to set off. In the end, some that Madara had went off, but despite the fact that nothing went as expected, Tejina admits to our protagonist that they have become closer. Back to the magic club, now we have Tejina doing a trick with some balls which consists of trying to make them disappear by holding them with one hand. But she's unable to hold them, thinking that it could be her sweat, so the assistant decides to try, and he is able to hold the balls with just his palms without problems, perhaps because he has big hands. Tejina puts her hand against his, envying that he has big hands. However, this semi-romantic moment is ruined when they separate because our protagonist is left all covered in sweat from touching Tejina's hand. Then another day, we have the assistant entering the room. Now he sees Seki, but very sad. It turns out that she is like that because her brother has not spoken to her since he caught her going through his trash, waiting to find something strange. The thing is that she tells it as if it were nothing strange, and since these kinds of situations are common for her, it seems that she has a puppet of her brother with her, so she can entertain herself and teach some things related to it. Despite this, she is still so bored that she decides to have some fun with the protagonist, making it seem like she's going to kiss him when in reality she is just giving him a little Tejina doll. Curiously, when the assistant is left alone in the room, what he does is check her underneath. The next day, Masashi approaches the protagonist to ask him if the senpai has a boyfriend, which surprises him a lot, thinking that Masashi wants to hook up with Tejina. But it turns out that during one afternoon he saw her accompanied by a boy and being quite friendly. During the afternoon, the 2 brothers and the assistant decide to follow her to a cafeteria to see if she meets up with the boy, but already in the cafeteria, she ends up eating alone while practicing her magic tricks. Then they followed her to a supermarket where Tejina ends up alone entering the bathroom, taking a long time. This is noticeable when she comes out with a satisfied face. In the end, it seemed that there was nothing of what they were looking for. But to her surprise, Tejina ends up meeting a boy. The protagonist is very surprised by this, and Saki offers to console him because his reaction gives the impression that his heart broke when he saw that his beloved already had a boyfriend. But he affirms that the kind of affection he has for Tejina is the same when you adopt a stray cat that actually had a home. Just by observing him, Masashi begins to deduce that the guy is a married man with a lot of money who is being unfaithful to his wife. He adds to this deduction that he is probably also a recruiter of forbidden videos, a reference to a Masashi movie that he found. Both follow them to a store where later the boy offers to take her in his car. The protagonist begins to imagine a rather indecent scenario and finally decides to face it, only for it to be clarified later that the guy was his sister's husband who asked Tejina for help to buy a good gift for his wife. The man offers to take everyone in his car. The next day, our protagonist is heading to the magic club when from the hallway he hears Seki Masashi doing things worthy of Alabama. Although when he entered, he had only misinterpreted everything since they were teaching Tejina how to work with balloons, since inflating this kind of balloons is very difficult since they try to make them in the figures of dogs. So after some jokes, we see how Tejina has managed to create a little dog out of balloons, showing that if it's not magic, things tend to turn out pretty well for her. Although she says this too soon because the little dog explodes and only her most precious things remain. On another occasion, Tejina tells the protagonist that she finally found a way to make her magic tricks successful. This is how she decides to show him. First, she handcuffs herself and gets behind a curtain, and after a while our assistant opens the curtain only to realize that Tejina had disappeared. But in reality, she was hiding inside a locker, explaining that the real trick was to disappear and not take off the handcuffs. The protagonist was impressed but decided not to think much about it. So after the trick, he left the classroom, leaving the senpai trapped in a locker, because remember that she was handcuffed. At night, a guard enters the classroom and finds her stiff in the locker. The next day, the magic classroom was closed because Tejina had not arrived yet, so our protagonist would enter through the door of the chemistry classroom, running into Madara. Here, she would give him a cold Coca-Cola, but it would freeze on contact with the air, an impressive chemistry trick. And since Madara loves to impress the protagonist, she explains the trick of throwing a tablecloth without the objects on top of it falling, but since she is not strong enough to do the trick, she ends up throwing a liquid on herself when pulling it. For her part, Tejina had already arrived at the magic classroom and was very thoughtful because she saw the assistant in the chemistry classroom, wondering if he preferred to be there than with her. For this reason, she decides to take a look at the classroom to see what the assistant was doing. She notices that Madara was on top of the assistant, thinking that they were doing other things. It is then that they explain what happened with the tablecloth, and upon hearing it, she decides to try it. But obviously it goes wrong, and since it is quite hot, the chemistry club ends up invading the magic club because the classroom was cooler. Something bothers the president of the chemistry club. On another occasion, we see that the protagonist is asleep in the magic club, and Tejina, seeing him, decides to practice her magic in silence so as not to wake him up, which she achieves with great success. Despite the fact that she was craving it, and shortly before waking him up, she stops because she wants to let him sleep a little longer. But then she realizes that he was awake the whole time playing with some cards, as she knows how long he has been watching her practice her magic. The next day, Tejina is in a bunny suit. This is a new strategy to combat her stage fright, because if she is embarrassed that everyone looks at her, what she has to do is channel her embarrassment into something that embarrasses her even more, like a bunny suit. This ends up making a lot of sense because all her tricks work well, but the protagonist cannot concentrate on the tricks. In the end, Tejina's suit comes off and leaves us with a good ending for this anime.